So, most business owners in India have a simple plan for succession that is called hope. We are sitting on an intergenerational wealth transfer of $44.8 trillion. $44.8 trillion. That's the real number. And no one has any plan with regards how to go about it. Intergenerational wealth transfer is one of the biggest issues prevalent in the country right now. And this is the largest wealth transfer that the country has ever seen. Today we have Mr. Vijaykumar Puri, who is a chartered accountant himself, a lawyer and a CS, and is currently a partner with VPRP and Co. Chartered Accountants. We are starting with Valumonk's first episode on a fireside chat wherein we speak about everything, right from investments, wealth, succession planning, as we are talking about it today, and how to manage it smarter. So, Vijay, what do you think is the current situation about succession planning in India? And do you think there is a general awareness amongst people?
Mm. Firstly, thanks Mitul for having me here. Today it's first episode for the fireside chat. Very happy to be here. Again, succession planning really one of the topics very close to my heart. I've written in the newspaper many times on that. India is for everyone. Succession planning is nothing but a will. Tell succession plan, everyone just says will. उनके लिए will ही succession plan होता है. But that's not true. In आजकल the family structure in India especially is evolving very dynamically. Now in such a scenario, when the family structure is evolving, how can the succession structure not evolve? So it is very important that each family treats succession as a very personal thing and not a one size fits all approach. And that is where succession is something which should be further than a will.
So, before we get into specifics, I know you are an expert on this topic. Is a will really needed?
I think that is something we should ask the Ambanis here, because that one act of Mr. Dhirubhai Ambani not leaving a will, almost tore apart Reliance Industries, which is today it's India's biggest conglomerate, and if you can see how close we were to losing such a great crown jewel of India, had because there was no proper succession planning done.
Yeah, and that's very true. I think a Forbes article also mentions that only 2 to 3% of India's wealthy class are actually writing a will. And this I'm talking about the wealthy class or the HNIs. The awareness with regards to will for the middle class people, etc., is extremely low, and that's something which is very prevalent. But is a will actually only the thing that is needed for people who want to, when they look towards succession planning?
See, will is a starting point today because family structures are so dynamic. You can't just rely on one will to do everything for you. A will is just a document. It's a document on piece of paper. The real thing always starts with a conversation.
Yeah.
So every family has to see where they are at today. See, divorces are so common. There are various people who have multiple spouses, and there are various assets left over from those marriages. People have different children, not to judge anyone, but people have different children in different families. And these are the situations which makes succession planning very complex. And in such a scenario, you have to start with a conversation to see where your family is at. Yeah, if it's a very straightforward family, a will is sufficient. Just get a will drafted, that is sufficient in itself. But when you talk about you can't say that one will applies for every family out there.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think the conversations that we've had with clients when we cover for their investments and wealth in general, I think one negative thing that we've seen whenever the point of will or succession planning that comes out is death. We don't want to talk about death to our children. We don't want to talk or have that uncomfortable situation or an uncomfortable discussion out amongst the family because it involves death. I think that is one taboo because of which I think will writing right now in India is not very common or something that people look forward to.
I'll stop you there. Why,
Yeah.
why do you think people don't have those conversations? Why do you think families are so afraid in India to have those conversations?
I mean, if you look at the West, if you look at UK, you look at US, there are a proper trust system that goes on, and people in general. When I speak to a lot of my colleagues there in the UK specifically, everyone is talking about will, about how they are going to plan for their future, etc. In India, when we speak to clients as a, because this is one of the basic things that we ask a client who is coming to us for retirement planning, that if you have two kids, are you, have you thought of your asset distribution and stuff like that? बोलता है अभी भी टाइम है, अभी तो मैं यंग हूँ काफी.
Hmm.
See, we don't know the future. We end up telling them that, boss, it is necessary to consider this and at least look at asset discussion, asset distribution, or at least have a conversation around it. Because like you said, without having a conversation, we are not going anywhere. It basically starts as simple as having a list of assets in place. A lot of people, like before the chat we were discussing, we don't even know the passwords of a few things, so the password itself is lost. So firstly, tracking down the assets itself is a problem, because there is no consolidation tool that is available in the market. I think that conversation somewhere is missing, and people don't have that very openly with their kids. So that's the reason why I think a lot of these uncomfortable situation, people try and move away from it.
It's a taboo.
It's a taboo, right? So when we talk about a will, Vijay, is it as simple as just writing it on a piece of paper, having two witnesses sign it, and we are done, or how does it work?
See, very technically,
Mm-hmm.
just if you take a napkin and
Mm-hmm.
you write who gets what of your assets, that is a valid will in the eyes
Mm-hmm.
of law.
Mm-hmm.
But again, that's just because it's valid does not mean it's ideal, right?
Sure.
So it's better to get it drafted in a manner which it cannot be contested by anyone else. So
Sure.
better to use a professional or an advocate who can give you proper advice on how to distribute, on how your intentions can be brought forth. So if you want to distribute assets, you have, say you have two daughters, or you have two and you have one son. So how do you want to distribute it among your three children is
Mm-hmm.
something, while it may be clear in your head, but bringing it out into a paper will require certain level of legal acumen, so that after you pass away, it should not get contested in the courts of law. And as you very well know, once you enter the doors of the
Yeah.
court, it's a very long process for you to get out itself. You will be short of a few lakhs and a few years as well of your
No,
life.
absolutely. I think you make a very valid point here, that India has become very good at now generating wealth, at least for a few people. But when it comes to transfer, we are very poor over there. The transferring process is not happening, correctly, or so to say, in the right manner, which can protect the interests of the beneficiaries of the asset, right? uh, so like you were saying, that having a correct form of will, getting that legal advice is very necessary, because of a lot of smaller peculiar interests get safeguarded when you take some legal advice, rather than just writing it and trying to save on some legal cost there. But in terms of the costs which are involved in writing a will, is it very significant, or is it something which is nominal and anyone can afford, which makes it accessible to people?
See, drafting a will is, as I said, it's a drafting exercise.
Mm-hmm.
So depends on how many assets you have in how many locations.
Mm-hmm.
So that is where you just have to engage a professional to who will draft the will for you.
Mm-hmm.
And based on your complexity, it should not be a very expensive job at all. What really matters is the conversation before that
Sure.
drafting
Yeah.
happens. Everyone thinks a cost of will is everything they have to see, but the real cost is the conversation that is before that. You have to discuss with your spouse first, then
Mm-hmm.
you discuss with your family. Some people don't discuss it with their family.
Mm-hmm.
That, and taking out that time, some kids are sitting abroad, some kids are in boarding school or whatever. You are not taking out that time and sitting and deciding. So in terms of cost, the cost which everyone looks at is a very small cost.
Yeah.
The real game is in what happens before that cost is
The
brought in.
emotional cost involved
The
in this discussion, I think that is very heavy, which has people not doing this, I think, more than the other side of it, because I'm sure, while will writing will involve some cost, it's not something very significant which outweighs the benefit out of it, right?
exactly.
And I was reading some data the other day, I think a very interesting data. There's almost 2 lakh crore worth of assets which are unclaimed right now in the
Mm.
country. And that is simply because no one in the family had that discussion. No one even knows that these exist. A very similar case happened with a client the other day, that they just found some physical share certificates lying under the cupboard somewhere. And they came to us. Of course, we helped them then get to the rightful owner. But the point was, for the largest time, they were not even aware that this exists with us in the family. And like you were mentioning, for a lot of uh, NRIs or people who have assets abroad, I'm sure the inheritance law in the countries like US, UK, etc. makes the process more complicated. But for people in India, I think the basics of will writing in itself should cover for them, and not have a lot of these complications in the future. One question that I want to cover here is that everyone talks about that, अरे हाँ मेरे इन्वेस्टमेंट्स में तो नॉमिनी है, मुझे विल का क्या जरूरत है.
Hmm.
Is that the right way to look at it?
See, that is where people go wrong. People
Mm-hmm.
think that a nominee is the inheritor,
Right.
which is not true at all. The nominee is just the custodian. He is just the administrator who has to give it to the actual inheritor.
Mm-hmm.
In India, succession law is very simple. Either you have a will and you have some estate, or you have or it is called an intestate succession, which is
Sure.
as per the law under the Indian Succession Act. So under the Indian Succession Act, it is given how the assets get transferred. Else, there should be a what is commonly called as a will. These are the two very broad ways of succession in India.
Sure.
So when we talk about intestate succession, that is how if there is a nominee, but there is no will,
Mm.
then the succession will be as per intestate succession law, which
Mm.
is as per the Indian Succession Act. Suddenly, just because a nominee is added to a bank account does not mean that the nominee will get the benefit of the bank account.
Balance.
The bank account gets transferred to him. No, that's not the case. Even you have a associate member in your house. If you have that person registered in your property, that person's name is on the share certificate of your property. That also does not entitle them to your share directly. Under Indian law, nominee is just a custodian. And this has been held by the Supreme Court time and again. This is not something new. Supreme Court has clearly given a ruling that a nominee is just an administrator. He is not the legal heir.
Mm.
So, as a wealth advisor, I'll take this forward. So, as a wealth advisor, do you see this issue of nominees coming up? When people are also leaving behind their assets.
No, absolutely. I mean, when it comes to wealth, and in general, when you talk about mutual funds or having a demat account, and the nominee process around it, now the government has made at least having a nominee mandatory. पहले तो वो भी नहीं था.
Hmm.
So abhi, since that has happened, at least people are having a nominee in place. Of course, there is a general notion around which says कि nominee है तो इसके पास ही सब assets जाएंगे. वैसा नहीं है. It can be easily contested, and like you said, he's just the custodian over there, right? But what we try and tell people, that if, let's say, that specifically it has to go to this kid or someone else, we also promote somewhere something called a joint ownership. That, let's say, the owner one can be the parent, the owner two can be the kid, and once that parent passes away, the ownership changes directly to the guy, or to the girl, whoever is the second owner, to the mutual fund or to the demat for that matter. So joint ownership can also be interestingly used in such cases to avoid any confusion post the death, especially in a case where a will is not there. Of
Hmm.
course, like you mentioned, that anything and everything in India can be contested in the court of law, but having such processes at least streamlines your headache in the future, especially when it comes to transfer of wealth, so to say. Now, there is a general, which is just taking this discussion forward. I think we spoke a lot about will, right? What are the other ways that people look at when it comes to transferring wealth? There is one word that comes out very well amongst the ultra HNIs, at least, which is called as a trust. So, if you can explain what is a trust and how exactly do people use a trust as a medium to transfer wealth or as a mode for succession planning for our viewers?
Hmm. So, when you talk about a trust,
Mm.
it's usually a private trust which is
Hmm.
structured under the Indian law.
Sure.
Now, in a private trust, what really happens is that the property is given to the trust. A trust is a separate artificial entity
Okay.
and separate entity in the eyes of the law. So it has its own income tax registration PAN. It has to file its own tax returns. It has to pay its own separate taxation. So that is how a trust is structured in the eyes of the law.
Mm.
So all the assets are given to the trust. The trustee is appointed, which can also be the same person who's giving the property to the trust, and the trust manages the property on behalf of the entire trustee and the beneficiaries as well. So here in this entire gamut, trust is something which becomes a bit expensive to maintain.
Okay.
So it is, I wouldn't recommend a trust to everyone. A trust is something which should be used in specific cases only. It's a concept which works well in the West because of
Mm.
tax benefits which are given to
Sure.
trusts. In India, we don't have any tax benefits for trust. In fact, trusts are taxed heavily. They are taxed at the maximum marginal rate. So any income you earn in a trust, it gets it's a very complicated law. Even the income tax law is not very clear on that, and it's a very litigative position. So in India, a private trust is something which is necessary only in very specific scenarios. Now, which are those specific scenarios? One can be, where you have a very complicated family
Mhm.
structure. You have multiple spouses, and you have assets from each of those marriages, and you have kids from each of those marriages, and you want to ensure that while you're living, you want to transfer the entire wealth to the respective
Mm.
beneficiaries at the right time.
Mm.
So that is when a trust will come into play, because in a trust, you there's a trust deed.
Mm.
So whatever you want to achieve by way of the trust deed, you can easily mention it in the trust very clearly, and that is what will happen. So there cannot be any ambiguity in terms of a trust. So because it's written, the trust deed very clearly specifies that while the person is living.
So it's a rule-based thing, so to say, that post the passing away of the person, the trust continues, the legacy of the family is taken forward.
Correct.
So while you talk about trust, you mentioned that it is an expensive affair. Is establishing a trust an expensive affair, or what exactly do you mean by that?
Establishing a trust is less expensive as maintaining it.
Sure.
So when the trust makes investments, it earns income on that, right? So that income is taxable, either either in the
Mm.
hands of the beneficiaries, or it is taxable in the hands of the trust.
Sure.
Again, various complicated tax laws, we are not getting into that
Mm.
today. But for a trust, even maintaining the trust, just as simple as the yearly expense of you maintaining the balance sheet, the books of accounts, the filing the tax returns, all of that, doing TDS under law, all of that has its own expenses. And more than expenses, it's also a headache of
Mm.
maintaining it and ensuring that you have to do that.
Yeah, and I think the most important role over here will be the role of the trustee. So, who is appointed as a trustee, I think, determines the future of the trust, and the legacy of the family is completely on the shoulder of the trustees. Which in the past we've seen instances when the trustees don't act in the interest of trust, and there are a lot of family disputes that happen, which makes the distribution of assets. In fact, it creates a bigger problem than solving it.
Hmm.
The whole purpose of creating a trust can go wrong if the trustee is not the right guy to lead it.
Hmm.
So that's something that people should consider as well. I think we've spoken about will, we've spoken about trust, we've spoken about estate planning, or how the succession should basically happen. And all of this is quite technical, like we've studied and we've spoken on. Let's say if there's a family today who's listening to us, what is the next thing that they should do if, in case they are motivated and they want to do the right thing with regards succession planning? What's the first thing you would recommend them?
First thing I would recommend is the patriarch or the matriarch, whoever is the main earning member or members of the family, should list down their assets. Because forget others, most people don't even know their own assets.
Mm.
एक इंश्योरेंस पॉलिसी निकाली थी 10 साल पहले, ये एक डीमैट अकाउंट था जो नॉन ऑपरेटिव होके बैठ गया है. People don't even know their own assets. They know it in the back of their head, but even they have forgotten it. So first thing is make a list
Mm.
of what all assets you have, what all are your bank accounts, your assets, and then sit with your spouse. If you don't have a spouse, sit with your family and have a broader discussion of where you want the each asset to go. There is no mandate under law कि आपको हर बच्चे को इतना पैसा देना है. We all have seen बाग बन रहे
Yeah.
हैं. So there's no mandate under law.
Correct.
We have to. The thing is, it always starts with a conversation.
Sure.
The first thing that has to be done is a conversation as to where the assets will, who will get what assets, and who will manage who.
So, like, I mean, you cannot practically transfer something that you don't know exists, right? So,
Exactly.
the first step, like you said, for all and everyone out there is have that conversation. It's uncomfortable, maybe at times, but it is for the benefit of your kids, for your spouse, and your family in general. So, have that conversation. I think one question that often comes up is we spoke about will, we spoke about estate planning in general. Is it very different for an entrepreneur or someone running a business versus a salaried employee?
See, it is, the principles remain the same.
Sure.
See, when you are a salaried employee, the legacy that you leave behind is in terms of the wealth that has been accumulated.
Yes.
But when you are in an entrepreneur, what you're leaving behind is a whole business which is running. It has its own heart, it has its own soul. A business is a living entity. So when you are a businessman who's leaving things behind, the biggest trap I've seen businesses fall into is that it was structured as a sole proprietorship.
Mm-hmm.
If it's structured as a sole proprietorship and the person passes away, everything, all the business assets also go into intestate succession,
Mm-hmm.
unless it's clearly specified what goes where.
Mm-hmm.
So, so having a sole proprietorship is the first, I would say, problem in terms of succession of a business. And I personally have seen so many of those, sole proprietorships where the owner unfortunately passes away, suddenly, COVID or unforeseen circumstances, and the entire business gets stuck up.
Mm.
So a business which has been built over decades of so
Yes.
much hard work, so much effort, is now reduced to nothing but
Zero. Yeah.
tied up in courts, just because two kids are not aligning on how to split the business.
No, you're right. I think as far as a salaried person is concerned, I think it's a very normal process when the list of assets is written and then that gets transferred to the rightful owner as per his wish.
Correct.
uh, and but when it comes to business, I think there are two steps involved over there. One is his personal wealth, whatever he's created, that will follow the same suit like how a salaried employee goes. However, the second question is the most important one, which is who runs the business. So one question is who gets what, but the second question, which is a very important question, is who runs the business. And these both may not be the same person as well, right?
Exactly.
So for a business guy, it's a more complicated process, and that is something that we should take care of. So thanks for your time, Vijay. I think it's been a pleasure to hear your thoughts on succession planning and how people can go about it. A Forbes summary basically said that 70% of the families wherein the wealth is transferred from Gen 1 to Gen 2 lose their wealth. This number goes high and reaches 90% when it is transferred from Gen 2 to Gen 3. And here the reason is not the capability of the people to get it transferred, but the main issue over here revolves around documentation, governance, and a formal family communication. So, guys, please get it right. At least start with that communication or that discussion today. It might be uncomfortable, but it is for your future. Thanks a lot.